Heath. Of course, we're streaming on YouTube as well this morning. If you want to watch, that's at the Pulse of an H. Good morning on this Monday. Good morning, J Dog. Hope you had a good weekend. I saw you were out there ruckusing or rucking or whatever you call it. Rucking? How far did you have a good ruckus rucking? A long one? No, he's not even. J Dog's not a Monday morning person. Hope you are, though. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play the Pulse of an H in addition to 107.7 FM, WTPL, 98.1 AM on the coast up. I'm sorry, 98.1 FM on the coast up into York County and Dover, Rochester, Portsmouth, up 16, or Ossipee Corridor, down to Hampton, 1270 AM, 107.3 FM in the Lakes region, 1490 AM, WEMJ. We're adding extra FM signals with that HD2 digital clarity. If you like that on the coast, 98.7 FM worldwide. Hey, Alexa. Hey, Google. Play the Pulse of an H. Hope you had a good weekend. Turned out to be a really nice, beautiful, weather-wise, gorgeous weekend. Today, might have some showers scattered here and there this afternoon, more cloudy than not. Tomorrow looks pretty nice, maybe the nicest of the week. We'll come back to all the other news as we get going this morning, but our poll question up on X, and everything here is the Pulse of an H. Make it easy for you. The poll question up on X at the Pulse of an H. Do you think political polls are accurate these days? Yes or no? Do you think political polling, locally, nationally, regionally, polls, you hear about them, you're starting to hear about them as we get into the midterms just over a year away. Are political polls accurate anymore? Yes or no? Now, some of this comes off of my observations, let's put it mildly. I'll just share with you. On Friday, I was reacting to the story from the University of New Hampshire about the latest survey and polling, and it was on Governor Kelly Ayotte's approval, disapproval. And I won't get into it all because at the bottom of the hour, we're going to have the head of the public policy or the polling or the survey stuff for all of UNH has been doing it a long time. Andy Smith is going to be joining us live at the bottom of the hour, basically talking about their polls and more defending them. I was critical on Friday because there was a poll out that the public is divided, and that and then the media jumps with headlines like, public approval divided over the job, basically Governor Ayotte's doing. And I just laughed because it said, 46% or 47, there's 46% approve or disapprove. And I just had a fun Friday show remarking that the polls going into November 5th, locally and nationally, were all incorrect. The national polls had the Harris-Trump numbers, including the battleground states, too close to call. We would not know for weeks or months who won the election. We knew that night. The polling here in New Hampshire had Harris winning the state comfortably. She ended up winning New Hampshire, but it was only 2 or 3 points. The polls going into the election had, within the margin of error, Joyce Craig, the Democrat, Kelly Ayotte, the Republican in New Hampshire. Ayotte won by almost 10%. So my point was, these polls are a joke. They're meaningless. And how could you poll anyone? Someone could have a 603 cell phone today and be sitting in Florida, not even going to vote in New Hampshire, but because they're on a phone list, respond with a text message and be part of a poll because they have a 603 cell phone. The days of a phone at the home on the wall are done. So how do you even reach people? How are these surveys done? So I said, I don't know if they're accurate. It's based on the last several elections, they seem to be right. When's the last time they were right? When is the last time these polls hit the nail on the head? So Andy Smith responded, which he should, by the way, given his job. I think he's a good person, very good person. He's been at UNH quite a while, and I appreciate his response. And he was not happy with my criticism or referencing their polling as a joke. And why would he be? I mean, if I was in his position, I would have done the same thing. I would have said, Jack, what are you doing? This is wrong. You're talking about a September poll and closer to the election. We had Craig maybe leading a little bit, but closer to the election, we had Kelly Ayotte with a lead, but she ended up winning by almost 10 points. The point is, though, he wants to come on and talk about it. I appreciate that. So I offered him a time slot, and he'll be on at 9:35. There you go. A couple other quick stories. I mentioned Mother Nature, and I will be candid because I'm on the water quite a bit in the ocean out of Portsmouth or off of Portsmouth, and we all knew well before we all knew well before the end of last week that the seas out there were going to be higher and rougher and stronger, and pretty much don't go out of the river, if you will. Don't go out in the open ocean. The swells and seas are going to be, pretty high, 8 to 10 feet maybe, and more if you're going way out. Some of them I heard out and way out in places like 10, 12 miles off the coast. They were big swells out there. And then strong rip currents. We had Alicia Preston Xanthopoulos on my show towards the end of the week, and she was talking about more than 100 lifeguard saves at Hampton Beach or rescues over the past several weeks before Hurricane Erin was off our coast, well out in the ocean, not making landfall, but whipping up the ocean. So I don't know if you heard, right on the day when you shouldn't be going out. Let me repeat that. It's sad because apparently, one person's still missing on a day when you should not have been going out on a boat. I don't care if it was small, big, or 50 feet, 100 feet, 20 feet, doesn't matter. Places like Newburyport, Salisbury, Portsmouth, don't go out. People knew it. 40, I think it was a 47-foot boat, tried to go off of Salisbury, and the boat's owner survived, one person missing. And then yesterday or over the weekend, a teenager was passed away. I think it was at Exeter Hospital after being rescued from the water at Hampton Beach because of strong currents and waves swept away. Basically, they tried to save the teenager and unsuccessful. So loss of life right here, and people. The tough thing is for people like over the weekend or yesterday, Sunday is the storm's gone, it's passed, but yet the current and it takes a few days, as you know or should know, for the seas to calm down. And it could be a point this week where it's very tranquil and like a lake out there, but people knew it wasn't going to be calm going in. And sometimes people just still think, I guess, in terms of the boating side, that you can beat Mother Nature. I've always learned you can't, whether it's in the mountains or on water. All right. Also, the Jeffrey Epstein story just doesn't seem to want to go away. Um, One of the main Epstein accusers who passed away has written a memoir, and also more from Ghislaine Maxwell talking about her interviews. And that story is still out there. And also the federal crackdown on law enforcement. President Trump, the White House, were actually the ICE chief the White House officials saying Chicago and Baltimore are next as part of this federal crime task force on crime, like we're seeing in Washington, D.C. You heard in our news that the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, is firing back at President Trump, saying, basically what the mayor of Washington had said is our violent crime stats are down. We only have a couple hundred homicides or murders a year. Seems like a lot to me, but whoa, we only have a couple hundred, so it's not as bad, and we don't need this. But President Trump saying, clean up your city, and or we're coming in to do it for you and with you, basically. So Chicago and Baltimore up next will have reaction. Hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play the Pulse of an H. We're looking at a Monday. And again, hope you had a good weekend. Busy, busy show today and also tomorrow. Got a busy show. Looking forward to hearing more from how the New Hampshire's chief liquor enforcement, or the office that enforces safety on terms of liquor enforcement with hospitality and licenses, is working with restaurants. We're going to tell you about the opening of the Friendly Toast restaurant right here in the capital and how they're working with the state very well and very closely. Also, we're going to be hearing this morning from some of our regular news contributors, Rory O'Neill, NBC News Radio National correspondent, Doug Tengden on the economic side later in this hour. Federal Reserve, you heard at the end of the week on Friday. We had a live report from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where Jerome Powell forecasted a rate cut this next month, September. It will probably only be 0.25%, but the feeling is that the Fed will move to lower that interest rate bank to bank, which will trickle down eventually to consumer lending, things like mortgages. How much? We'll find out. Doug Tengden on deck. Back on this Monday morning, Jack, Heath, J-Dog on the boards. We are back in just a few. All right, we are back on this Monday morning, and a lot of people doing the back to college thing this week, and a lot of parents, a lot of kids, a lot of you out there getting back, yeah, and back to college. Though a lot of students, parents. I just got a couple messages, parents bringing their kids to Vermont or New Hampshire or Maine or Boston or out west, wherever they're going to college. So that time of year, J Dog, and as you said, back to school. Is Labor Day this Monday, J Dog? Oh my, oh my goodness. Who do they play? Who do they play? Oh, that's right. Big win for Tommy Fleetwood, the British golfer, winning the FedEx. He's finally gets his first PGA win. If you're going to win one, that's one to win money wise. Yeah. Well, because the FedEx Cup, you get all the. It's like a poker game. He's getting all those chips. But people are going to remember he's been on the cusp all summer. He's been close. So his earnings have not been shufflers up, but he wasn't like almost like more tournaments than not. He was in that top 8 or 10 all summer. Yeah. 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 Yep. Yep. All right. It's interesting around the world when you look at news in Holland, in places like Rotterdam or Holland over the weekend. There were a lot of protests because a 17-year-old girl was killed by a quote unquote asylum seeker, the same asylum seeker who was charged with raping a woman 5 days earlier. But this is kind of in the Dutch area, and there've been a lot of protest about. Um, I guess call it illegal migrants in the area, but in countries like Sweden and Norway, this has been going on for years, and of course, there's been big debate in Europe before this administration came in, and basically going after illegal migrants, whether it's ICE going into going after this administration and the president's first 100 days, or the continuation of immigration enforcement, and it's causing a big well, not a I don't know how much of a big debate, but actually, I take it back. It is a big debate in this country, but I don't know where the numbers are in terms of public opinion, of who thinks it's over too much, who likes what's happening. But I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you one thing that no one out there, and if you can, you're welcome to join us 603-228-2080. Not one person I know of out there can argue with this. Let me just go back a little bit. Before we had the immigration debate of ICE, immigration, custom enforcement, the ICE roundups, if you will. Let me ask you one simple question. Was the southern border broken? Meaning, did we have an illegal migration crisis in America? Was the southern border broken before this past November 5th? Did we have a big problem on the southern border? 9 out of 10 people with some oxygen flowing normal to the brain would say, absolutely, the southern border, we have a crisis. We have millions of people crossing the border, mainly Texas into Mexico, Mexico into Texas. We don't even know the numbers. In the last 4 years alone, that would have been the Biden-Harris administration. No one knows the number of people that illegally came into this country. Is it 10? Is it 12? Is it 20? Is it 11 million? But it's in that ballpark. We don't know the number. And I think a lot of people, including yours truly, thought I knew it wasn't the border security and the people working on the borders problem. They weren't the reason, but I just thought it was impossible to stop this migration of illegal migrants into this country based on the last 4 years. Look at millions of people. I mean, how can you, if it could be fixed, it would be fixed. The southern border would be made secure, whether it was a wall or not. Then you had Governor Abbott down there, the Texas governor, trying everything he could to protect his state because Texas was bearing the brunt of the legal migration, the border. The two cartels out of Mexico were taking over the Mexican side of the border. We had a humanitarian crisis with smuggling of people trying to get into the country, taken advantage of, assaults, smuggling, murders. The cartels were taking advantage of getting fentanyl into the country through the porous border, but millions of people were pouring in, and everything Governor Abbott did in Texas under the previous administration to stop it, to stem it, to slow it down, he was counter-checked every step of the measure, whether he was trying to fortify the Rio Grande with some, wire fence in the water in the river so it would force people to not cross over, whether he reinforced the border, whether they passed laws in Texas. If someone illegally comes into the Texas and breaks the law, they can be arrested. He tried everything. And every time, every step of the way, the former administration bucked him, said he couldn't do that. But millions of people were coming in, millions each year. And the perception was you couldn't do anything about it. It was impossible. It was an impossible problem to solve. I think that's an accepted fact. Everything I'm saying, this isn't a political statement. This is a fact. The southern border was impossible to close until it was closed. And in the first 100 days of this new administration, the Trump Vance administration, they closed the southern border. How are they able to do that? I'm asking you the question. How were they able to do that? How were they able to close the border that quickly after 4 years? It seemed impossible. Millions of people, let's just call it 12 million people in 4 years came across illegally. 12 million people, 4 years. It seemed like an impossible problem to solve until this administration closed the border in the first 100 days. How is that possible? Well, I think the only answer is it could have been done, but it wasn't because the previous administration chose not to. And no one can argue that statement. The most vehement Democrat, passionate supporter, you could not argue with what I just said. The previous administration was not a priority to close the southern border. It wasn't, or they would have done it because this administration showed it could be done in 3 months. So forget the current debate over ICE rounding up people. Let's just talk about the southern border, which is the crux of the problem. For humanitarian crisis, illegal migrants coming in, no one knows how many. Fentanyl, no one, and this administration. Do you know the border today is 99.9% closed, the southern border? 99.9% closed. Now, you can debate and disagree on a lot of stuff currently, but the border is closed. And are we better off because that border is closed? I would make the case, not even a question. Not even a question. Some commentary. Political polling. Well, is it accurate anymore? Is it possible to have a meaningful survey or poll on public opinion, for example, on this candidate versus that candidate or this approval versus, and how do you poll today in a society where it's so hard to reach people? You got to text someone to ask them to take part in a poll. They could have an area code that's New Hampshire living in Arizona, not even voting here. And are they part of the poll? How do you accurately measure today with all the changing technology and people's habits and no longer like the home house phone? How can you meaningfully gauge public opinion to say that this governor or this candidate is underwater or above water in approval ratings, or this candidate's going to beat that candidate? And when's the last time these polls really nailed it? Because going back to 2016, folks, 3 weeks in mid to late October, Hillary Clinton was going to win over Donald Trump, and the quote was historic landslide in both the electoral college and popular vote, and Trump won. This last election, it was going to be so close between Harris and Trump, we would not know the results. You ready for this? For weeks or months. We were told that November 5th, don't expect to know the winner tonight in the presidential election because we will likely not know the results for weeks or months. We knew that night. So I was critical of the polls on Friday with a recent University of New Hampshire poll, and pretty critical, and Andy Smith took exception. He's the director of the polling for UNH. He's done it for a long time. Good person. I've known him for years, and appreciate his education and stuff in public surveys, but he wants to defend his polls after I called them a joke. I invited him on the show. He's coming up next. I don't blame him. I'd defend my polls too if that was my role. Good discussion coming up. That's coming up next on the Pulse of NH. Hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play the Pulse of NH. We're back in a few. Hey, top of the 10 o'clock. We have a fun interview coming up, J Dog. I think it's the folks from the Hopkinton State Fair. Oh my goodness. College football started. Kids are back to college and school starting. And oh my, when we start the fairs, you know it's a changing of the guard and seasons. So that's fun coming up. That's right, coming up. All right, I was just talking about political polling, and our poll question actually up on X at the Pulse of an H is: do you think the polls today, politically speaking, in elections nationally, locally, regionally, are they accurate anymore? And how do you do it? How do you track people today? That's just a simple barometer. But I want to thank Andy Smith out of the gate up front. He's the director of public surveys, if you will. There's a name for it, but University of New Hampshire. He's been doing it a long time. Very good person over there. I appreciate his educational stuff, but he's also heading up and has done it a long time. All the survey stuff, when we have these polls and you hear the University of New Hampshire poll on a public policy issue in New Hampshire, approval, disapproval, Trump approval rating, whatever it is, elections. And I was quite critical of polling in general on Friday, and he responded and took offense and exception. I don't blame him at all. I would too if I was in his position. Andy Smith joining us, and I appreciate that this morning. Good morning, New Hampshire, the Pulse of an Age. Good morning, sir. Hope hope you've been well. Well, you and I have, I think, a pretty good history going back to WMUR TV days. You've been doing this a while. I've been doing what I do a while. And I'm looking at polls today in general, not really you, Andy Smith at UNH, but in general, whether they're out of Boston at a certain college polling New Hampshire people or they're national polls before the election. You remember Trump and Harris, Harris and Trump. We won't know tonight. Weeks or months, too close to call. And we know that wasn't the case. And in New Hampshire, we've seen this thing move around. So I was critical on Friday on your most recent poll on an approval rating or disapproval rating of Kelly Ayotte, 47, 46%. Media runs with that. Public undecided about Kelly Ayotte and the job she's doing. And I'm not here as a person saying I think she's doing a great job, a bad job. I'm just saying, how the heck is that even accurate? How do you know these days? And you fired back, and you had a right to. I was talking going into this most recent election, November 5th. I cited a September poll that had Joyce Craig with a lead, the Manchester mayor. And I said Kelly Ayotte ended up winning by 10 points. You said we had a poll closer to the election that showed Ayotte was in the lead. So I noted that. I'm going to let you respond to my questions on polls today. How are they accurate? So I'm going to let you run with this. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Wow. Well well, I remember when I was news director at WMUR-TV would contract I think it was your predecessor, was it Moore? I think his last name was Moore. Yeah, and I remember I'd have to go to get budget approval because, "Oh, these things cost that much." But continue on the complexity, go ahead. Right, 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 right. So if I understand this from a layman's point of view, your panels versus a poll, since it's difficult polling a group of people, you will pluck people from the population, call them your panel, and then poll them and come up with a percentage? Yeah, yeah. I do you within the famous thing is polls have a margin of error during every gubernatorial presidential cycle of 4 to 6%. Do you think these panels are within that margin of error, or is there no way of telling anymore? Right. But right. Well, let me ask you this, and I should say Dr. Smith, I just noticed on your title PhD. So if everyone called Dr. Jill Biden doctor, we can call Dr. Andy Smith. Let me ask you that let me ask you this, Andy. Let's just talk about New Hampshire for a moment and this one poll on Kelly Ayotte. Now I know we're a year away, more than a year away from the midterms. But your panel poll 46, 47%, the public's divided on the job she's doing, basically is the headline. Um How do we know that I'm just curious because if you look at the election November 5th, and I'm just going that wasn't that long ago, they were running neck and neck. Let's just cut to the chase. Out of state, in-state polls, Joyce Craig, the Manchester mayor, Kelly Ayotte. It was a very tight race. Some would say going into November 5th within the margin. Kelly Ayotte won by almost 10%. That wasn't like 2 or 3%. Today, and I'm not this isn't about Kelly Ayotte. I'm just asking this question, but it's political, and I'll have people like Anna Brown on my show today coming up. I keep asking this question. We know in the U.S. Senate race, it's getting crowded a little bit. Chris Pappas has a Democrat challenger now. There's a couple Republicans running. We know that first district congressional race where Mr. Pappas is giving up his seat is very congested. So we know it's contentious. There's people running on both sides of the aisle. Maggie Goodlander as a challenger. So Kelly Ayotte, if that poll you did or survey or panel poll, whatever you want to call it, is even remotely accurate, I would say, hey, if she's under 50%, she's challengeable and she's beatable. Even though governors, we have a two-term, most get reelected. So I'd say to myself, why, if Kelly Ayotte is underwater in approval rating right now, why isn't any Democrat? Now I know you're not a political activist on a campaign type. Why isn't any Democrat out there challenging her right now with a year to go? And I know one will. I'm not saying that. Maybe a couple will. But if she's so vulnerable in public opinion, how do we know that the approval rating of voters isn't 58%? Right. Yeah, yeah, but New Hampshire is pretty people do care about statewide. Yeah, yeah, good point, but, who knows? You're right, yeah. Mhm. Y Right. Y do you what let me ask you only because of time, and I'd love to get you back again, a more regular Andy Smith, University of New Hampshire. Let me ask you this, if Trump has always been sort of but even the Harris-Trump numbers in New Hampshire going in, Harris I well, and we cut to the chase. This is fun. If we have another minute and we cut off our next guest, I'm sorry. Um, I believe, Andy, you may not agree with me, that part of Joyce Craig's campaign strategy was, "I'm just gonna run a good, safe race and hope that Harris wins New Hampshire by 8 or 10 points, and that will pull me across the line." And you probably can't convince me there's not some truth to that. And at the end, Harris won New Hampshire, but Trump was closing. It was only 2 or 3 points. It wasn't 8 to 10 points. So maybe New Hampshire registration, for all I know, has gone up since Trump has won in November at a time when you think it's supposed to out of power. So I don't know how we get all this accurate going forward. But I guess the question I have of you, since it's so hard and always has been, but I think today in a digital, handheld, smartphone society, I think it's probably harder than ever. So you're going the panel route. Is it worth doing public surveys? Right. Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, well, it's something to talk, it is something to talk about. And people always say polling candidates, if it doesn't go their way, the campaign will always say the candidate. It's just a snapshot in time. The only thing that really matters is voting day. But let me ask you this one because it's not a UNH question. I don't think it's more of a national. On November 5th, even Governor Chris Sununu, and I think you would argue or debate that he's pretty sharp, right? Analytically, pretty sharp governor, former governor. He was on my show and he's been a regular analyst. In fact, he likes to guest host when I'm off, even with his new aviation job. Um, he said on election day that morning when Trump called into my show, we are doing the show live the morning of, and he said, Jack, your listeners should know, and you get a lot of listeners regionally, that we're not going to know tonight who won. Chris Sununu said this because the national narrative was don't expect you're going to know who won tonight between Harris and Trump. We won't for weeks or months. Every single national poll was wrong and way off. We knew that night. Why were those polls wrong? Because I when I had national guests on, they said, "Oh, these polls have adjusted from their past errors. They're more accurate. They won't be that far off. We won't know that night who won, Trump or Harris, and we knew that night. Why were they all wrong?" Well, no, hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not disagreeing that because I do remember. But many of the national media, TV, were saying Harris has got a slight lead in Pennsylvania. She's got a couple point lead. We're projecting Harris is going to do okay here, here. She didn't win one battleground state, even if it was a couple points. So what I'm saying, what did they miss? What did they miss? Yep, yep. In the, all yeah, all went one way, yeah. Hey, real quick, we gotta run, but I'd love to get you back. Andy Smith, real quick. Knowing what you know now, we're a year out, and we really I think it's gonna come down to the economy, the economy, the economy 6 months from now, and we don't know. Everyone said tariffs, we're gonna be in a deep recession by now, we're not. I don't know where things are at. I don't know if anyone does, but do you sense, knowing what you know now, is New Hampshire gonna see a blue wave, kind of more Democrats and independent voters? Are we gonna see a blue wave this fall in your thoughts or not? Right, right. And we've seen a real proclivity in the last several elections of New Hampshire voting Democrat in the federal races, like the Senate race this fall or the Congress, but Republican at the state house. So with that model set, and New Hampshire tends to have a, you know, well, yeah, but it's like I call it a split voter personality. They want federal Democrat, local. Do you think if you had to say, does Kelly Ayotte have a better than 50% chance at reelection at this point? What would you say? Interesting. Yep. Good point. Andy Smith, thanks for being a good sport. All right, take a quick break. Doug Tangton, we'll talk interest rates, mortgage, Federal Reserve. Back in a moment. All right, we went a little long with Andy Smith, Doug Tengden, worldmarketadvisors.com on an economic front on a Monday morning. Good morning, Doug. Good, thanks. Beautiful weekend. You didn't have to deal with stronger currents or seas up in the upper valley, but I hope you had a good weekend. Okay, I guess what I wanted to do, we only have we have 5 minutes. A lightning round for you. We had a live report from Jackson Hole. Kevin Cirilli was out there for that economic meeting. Jerome Powell is all but broadcast on Friday or going to the end of the week. We're going to lower interest rates next month, September. I'm guessing 0.25%, but we're going to lower them. The environment is such, so that means most likely yes. How much do they lower them? And will that help someone who's on the fence of getting a home mortgage, for example, or a consumer loan? Take it away, Doug. Hmm. Interesting. And do you think they'll continue rate cuts through the end of the year? In other words, do you think the rate interest rate, do you think they'll get up to like a point, a full point? It, Doug, when I talk with younger folks, younger meaning like, home buyers or home shoppers in that sort of 25 to 40-year-old bracket, and I've done this a few times over the years, I'll say, Do you have a mortgage now? Do you have a home? Yes. What's your fixed mortgage rate for 30 years? They'll say 3% or 2.9. When I say you'll never see a fixed interest rate for a mortgage that low again in your lifetime, they say, "Really?" I said, "Absolutely." In fact, I don't think it will ever get below 5% the rest of our current lifetimes, and I've seen it go up to 14, and I've seen it come down to about 2.9. I don't see it ever coming down anywhere much below 5. Am I right or wrong in sharing that with them? Do you so I don't wanna say never, but how about next 10, 15 years? You really think there's a chance interest rates could ever get even below 4% again in the next 10 years? All right. Good stuff. Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Doug Tengden, World Market Advisors. Make it a good Monday. Thanks, Doug. We come back. We're going to talk some Hopkinton State Fair next.